Oh yeah, how's it going? It's Terry from FUBAR, and I understand the boys from Sweater Weather are doing a podcast all about FUBAR. Have a great one, boys. Ow! Just give her.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sweater Weather. I'm your host, Aaron Giovanone. Great to be back with you. This week, I'm blessed with a visit from my podcast comrades at the Alberta Advantage, Clinton, Joel, and Karen. We assemble to chat about a Canadian and Calgarian classic franchise, FUBAR. It's been nearly 20 years since the first FUBAR film brought us the endearing misadventures of Terry and Dean, two lovable headbangers. Today, we appreciate FUBAR's depiction of working class life, its brilliant, sometimes dark humor, and we wonder what it really means to give her. This is actually just the beginning of a two-parter for Sweater Weather. Today, we discuss the first film, FUBAR, from 2002, but keep your eyes peeled for the next episode of Sweater Weather as well, where we will be discussing FUBAR 2, film from 2010, and the FUBAR TV series, Age of Computer, from 2017. That's for the next episode. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that Sweater Weather is a proud member of the Harbinger Media Network. Check out their fine lineup of shows at harbingermedianetwork.com. And if you like Sweater Weather, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support will help us do what we do here, which is essentially bring a class analysis to Canadian arts and culture. And that's a perspective that is unfortunately really lacking. Patrons will help us keep going and growing, and I will even shout out new patrons on the show. In fact, I have a new patron to mention this week, Margaret Griffiths. Margaret, thank you for your Patreon support at the $10 level. Margaret is actually my mom. My mom is finally a patron of Sweater Weather, so I know I'm doing something right. Okay, enough of this silliness and on to an entirely different kind of silliness. Here are Clinton, Joel, and Karen talking FUBAR. So today we're talking about FUBAR. I guess it stands for fucked up beyond all recognition. It's understood that you know that's what it means. It's never actually really defined for you, but it's a phrase that describes very much the energy of this franchise, right? That includes 2 films, a television series, and an ongoing YouTube project, as well as a rock band. But anyway, before I get into this, maybe you guys should all introduce yourselves one by one, right?
Sure. My name's Joel. I don't know what else you want me to say.
From the Alberta Advantage.
Yeah, give us your bona fides.
Brain power behind Alberta Advantage.
Yeah, I do a lot of the organizing and occasional panelist on the Alberta Advantage podcast, and I also write occasional pieces for Jacobin as well.
And you're from Alberta, and you live
from
in
Alberta.
Calgary.
And most important fact, Alberta boy.
Hello, I am Clinton. I am also from the Alberta Advantage. I do the newsletter, and I too am the brains, but I'm also the looks and the moves.
Clinton, returning champion. Thanks for being here again.
Get my challenge coin.
Nice. I'm Karen, also from the Alberta Advantage. I think, I write, I design, I do mailouts, I write columns. I think I already said right. Well, anyway, brain power may be a little overrated, but I am not from Alberta, but I live in Alberta. Like half of Alberta, I am from Cape Breton, so that is going to be relevant with what we're talking about today.
This is just colonialism. We're just taking over Sweater Weather. Alberta Advantage is coming to Sweater Weather like it's Vietnam, and we're the French.
Okay. I wonder who the Americans are in that scenario. Anyway, I guess what I'll do is I'll just introduce FUBAR, the first movie, up front. So this came out in 2002. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it in its entirety, it's a mockumentary style film. It's supposedly about 2 headbangers, Terry Cahill, played by David Lawrence, and Dean Murdoch, played by Paul Spence. And it's set in Calgary. So it's presented as a kind of ethnography, right? Being filmed by a middle class guy. This film about these headbanger kids, and the filmmaker himself, his name's Farrell, and he becomes kind of a character too, right? So that's a little bit what FUBAR 1 is like. I guess some background on its making. So the actors involved, Lawrence and Spence, they were childhood friends in Calgary. They both trained at the Loose Moose Improv Theater, and there are lots of significant alumni from Loose Moose, including Bruce McCullough and Mark McKinney of The Kids in the Hall, and Andrew Fung, who's on Kim's Convenience. I've been to the Loose Moose a few times and seen some shows there too. It's pretty good. Have you guys ever been?
So I've been, and also if you grew up as a theater kid in Calgary, there's a good chance that somebody from Loose Moose probably came to your class at least once in your dramatic education to teach you improv. And the very first thing that everybody does in a high school class in 2005-6, when Loose Moose comes to teach you improv, is say, "Oh man, we're doing theater sports. You mean like whose line is it anyway?" Which makes them furious. Furious because they claim to have invented theater sports, which I believe is true, and I believe at least one of the Whose Line mainstays, I believe maybe Mockery, is a Loose Moose like alumnus who just like went on to fame, fortune, and left them all like holding the bag in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And so yes, the first time, yes, they have no compunction about if a 15-year-old kid says, "Oh man, I love Whose Line Is It Anywhere," they will berate them in front of their entire class.
Well, apparently Dave Lawrence, that's what happened to him, is that Loose Moose visited his high school when he was 15, and that's how he got involved in improv theater. And he brought Paul Spence along with him. I guess they were neighbors and then friends as kids. So the director of the franchise, also important because his name's Michael Dowse, and he directed all of the FUBAR stuff. Same guy. FUBAR, the number 1, was his directorial debut. He's had a long, kind of successful, big time Hollywood career since then. He's directed a few comedies, some Canadian ones like Goon from 2011. Some of you might remember that movie, extremely violent hockey movie with tons of fighting in it. And The F Word from 2013, I think, is a romantic comedy. I haven't seen that one. But more recently, a movie that got some attention, Stuber in 2019. I don't know if you guys saw Stuber, but it is like a 90-minute commercial for Uber, a low-key commercial for Uber. But it is also like actually a pretty well-made action movie. So
Nice.
Michael Dowse has gone on to make big movies. His latest one is Coffee and Kareem, and that's on Netflix right now. I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it.
My favorite is It's All Gone Pete Tong. That's just an amazing movie. Excellent soundtrack. Much similar to FUBAR in that way.
Yeah,
that was his 2004 follow-up to FUBAR.
Yeah, that's basically where I come. Like, I had seen FUBAR, hadn't seen it since it first came out, but I am just dyed-in-the-wool fan of It's All Gone Pete Tong. It's on my list of 5 movies that you can throw in on at any time or on a date, and will have broad acceptability in any room. And it is the movie that I've shown the most dates and then gone on to smooches. And then,
wow.
Yes. So thank you, Michael Dowse. And it also,
high praise.
And it also has Paul Kaye in it, who is an outrageously great character actor from, I believe, the UK, who first came to my attention when Paul Kaye was on the episode of Spaced, where he does performance art horribly for an audience that includes Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Just a tremendous movie, and honestly, the reason why I'm here, because I love that movie so much, and I want to talk more about Michael Dowse.
Ah, great. Well, I think 2004, it's still very much an indie vibe from Michael Dowse's work, I'd say. So FUBAR premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2002, and it enjoyed a coveted midnight spot in the schedule that just a couple of years before that had launched the Blair Witch Project into the stratosphere of being super duper popular. So this got the Sundance spot got the film some attention in Canada, and Odeon Films, that was a distribution arm of Cineplex Odeon Theaters, they picked it up and distributed it in Canada. And I guess it ran for a little while. I don't think it really was that popular outside of Canada, but certainly in Canada over the 2000s, it kind of acquired, a cult status. And I mean, how would I summarize just the plot of FUBAR? It's before we get into it. I mean, I guess you could just say Dean and Terry, the two main guys, they spend most of their time giving her. They're just they just
That's right.
That's true. That's what
correct.
happens.
They're drinking, they're raging, whatever. It's giving her is an expression of pure vitality, and also an avoidance of growing up. And I would say there is so what happens? Dean survives testicular cancer, which is the source of many jokes, of course. And Terry and Dean, they witness the sudden death of Farrell, the filmmaker. And what to me is a very funny scene. I know it's dark, but it's, I think it does really come off well as comedy. And so I guess my overall reading of FUBAR, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, but they have to learn the natural limits of Givener, to fully appreciate their current ability to give her. So they have to encounter death to understand the value of their life. This is like a very kind of populist, existentialist message, right? And
If you
so
are able to stop giving her, have you truly gived her? I say no.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, folks, what are your earliest memories of FUBAR? When did you first encounter this? Oh, did I say it's set in Calgary? Did I even mention this? So it's very much set in Calgary, and you see Calgary landmarks and stuff. So I guess it has a special status for Calgarians, maybe Albertans overall. So anyway, when did you guys first encounter this?
I can't remember the first time I saw it. I did a rewatch somewhere around 2011, 2012, and was like, "Damn, this is actually an excellent film. It's not stupid. It's good."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I rewatched it just a few days ago and prepping for this. The Calgary landmark thing is, maybe it's just because of my weird brain, but I find that to be like a really special part of the film because, and it depicts like the nondescript, like boring parts of Calgary, which are the most relatable parts. So like the bicycle path where they like spray paint Tron Funkin' Blows or whatever, or like you can see the city in kind of the distance, but you're just in kind of some suburb that like could be anywhere in Calgary, or like the 8th Street C train station features in that film also, which it no longer exists because they revamped all the train stations, and that station actually shifted a block east, and so so there's that train station just isn't there anymore, but you see like the old timey train station next to the McDonald's and stuff that still is on that block.
Yeah. When I think I saw this, I was living in Calgary for the first time. I've kind of come and gone from the city over the years. And I was living in a house with like 5 other people, like other grad students. It was probably like 2004, 2005. I think it was a couple of years after the movie came out that I saw it. And I just remember like seeing the house that Dean and Terry live in and go, oh, that's my house. It's exactly the same.
Yep.
It was the same kind of 50s bungalow, kind of that stucco in the back. Like you said, it could be any number of neighborhoods in Calgary. So it was like a real shock of recognition for me when I saw that.
So probably I first encountered it as the PSAs against smoking. That was my first exposure to these characters. And I'm like, oh, okay, these are just like the prairie versions of like the Trailer Park Boys or Bob and Doug McKenzie. Like every Canadian region has like a pair of guys who are just like hosers or stoners or givener or whatever. So I didn't get around to watching it till I think about 2009, 2010. So I was in Lawrencetown, Nova Scotia, which is a small town, Nova Scotia, kind of relatable in terms of the subculture, because basically this town had, well, a college that my partner was attending. So that was the only reason there's anyone under 50 in the town. And then there's a store, which is also the post office and the pharmacy, and a Legion where you drink and play meat darts, which is just playing darts. Then you win meat. So you have like meat that the locals have killed and butchered somehow, and and then the prize for winning darts would be like this packed up meat, and trundle home with that. So that was just, yeah, that was the culture. So much as I didn't recognize the Calgary landmarks because I hadn't lived here yet, I was like, oh yeah, this has like a deep resonance for all of Canada, and I know we'll get into that too. But and yeah, I think I would have probably seen the PSAs as well when I was just before we moved there. My partner and I were both back in our parents' house in Cape Breton. Like we were all like boomeranged, like we just kept losing jobs and stuff. So we're just like watching like old SCTV and just for laughs reruns, and then getting those PSAs about not smoking. So it's not a great life. So the opportunity to move to Calgary after we finished college was like there. So we took it. So it seemed like a kind of mental preparation.
The for those of you who don't know, I don't remember the anti-smoking ads when they ran, but I just encountered them again doing research for this, and they're pretty funny. Basically, the idea is that Terry and Dean and Tron, they all love smoking, and they're telling you how great it is to be a smoker because you meet other smokers when you ask them for cigarettes, and then you have something to chat about. And then at the end, you find out, oh, this is actually an anti-smoking like
Yeah, it seemed pretty cool to smoke. I never smoked, and I'm like, they seem to be having fun. But
yeah,
smoking is deeply cool.
Yeah.
Those PSAs are really, really funny because because it's only at the end you're like, oh, this is an anti-smoking thing.
Very effective.
Throughout the whole thing, you're like, this is pretty funny. It's not why I would smoke, but it's funny that they're doing this. And then at the end, you're like, oh, this is supposed to make me not want to smoke. Okay, it's more amusing than anything else, right?
Can work.
Great work if you can get it.
Yeah, I was just happy that the FUBAR boys made, they got a check from the feds to do that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think? This is from 2002. Oh, Clinton, did you want to say something about watching it for the first time, or?
Yeah, it's mostly because it had like some real world impacts on my life and the lives of my friends.
It's how you met your wife.
Yeah, exactly. And then we played meat darts.
Everybody loves to do that.
Sorry, I tried really hard. I tried really hard not to make that joke. It just popped out.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah. So every young white male of the age has like a Led Zeppelin phase, like a classic rock phase, because all of our parents were boomers, and eventually they'll introduce you to whatever flavor of classic rock they enjoyed the most. And then from there, if you have a movie on the shelf that's called FUBAR and has cool art on it and has some like dirtbags on the cover and is about classic rock, generally those young boys will see that. This included the majority of my friend group or groups in junior high and high school, and had significant lasting impacts on their life. They picked up guitars. It changed the way they dressed. It changed the way they talked. It changed their life ambitions. Eventually, it led to the things they would immerse themselves outside of school, which meant for the majority of them learning way too much about the Doors. And once you start learning about the Doors, then you want to do psychedelics. And then if you're not too smart, you like read like like Anthony Kiedis's book, and then you want to do heroin. And so like when people talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, I think that's stupid. But when you talk about like a gateway culture, I've seen it happen. I watched it happen to numerous friends of mine, and it completely altered the course of their lives. And FUBAR was no small kind of stone in that wall. It's
They were a brick on the path,
yeah,
to perdition.
Or another brick in the wall sometimes.
By the time I graduated, yeah, exactly. By the time I graduated high school, this movie was a half decade old, but it was a constant and persistent character in the cultural milieu of everyone I knew.
Oh,
It's I don't think that was really I maybe part of it was Calgary and it was just present because it was a Calgary movie, but it is actually insane about how much this like indie film from Calgary, made in 2002, had an impact on the people I know and myself. Yeah,
wow.
especially for one that I didn't really watch that much and am not like a professed fan of. It was just like around me. It was part of the radiation.
What do you think FUBAR represents? Like something significant about its historical moment? Like comes out in 2002, but then it's watched in I guess the years afterwards. Is there something that does it say something about that time in history? About the politics or the culture of the moment.
Well, I mean, it's post 9/11. It's in the middle of the war. Well, would have been right before, I guess, the war in Iraq, but definitely while like Afghanistan stuff is happening. Um, what was I found really interesting about the first film, at least, is like how very little political references there are in it. There's like little to no political content. It's
Yeah,
primarily just about like this like culture of given or whatever, right?
yeah,
There's a lot of like anxieties about masculinity and what it means to like grown up, and how do you deal with friends that are like being more mature perhaps when you don't
mm,
want to do that or whatever.
yeah.
But there's little to no like politics in it, which is interesting for a film from that era.
Yeah, the idea of growing up, the kind of the problems with the masculinity of these young men, right? Like that is something that's happening. Like Tron is, he's getting. I guess I don't know if he's married, but he's in a significant relationship, and he's like toning down his party lifestyle, and the two boys are not, right? And and so yeah, I think there's kind of a question too about like what is it to be a man, really. I mean, neither of them have jobs, and
That's
you
not
know
true.
Dean,
Terry, is it Terry who moves furniture?
he moves furniture, but he lies about it. He says that he makes furniture. And so that's a great point to bring up, because it shows that he's uncomfortable with his life as a like in manual labor. He wishes he were doing something, I don't know, more creative, more productive or something. So
there's
he's
there's a
unhappy.
there's a really great scene where there's just a series of shots, and the way it's like laid out, it's like he's talking about how like he's looking at a table and he's talking about how solid it is and how
Yeah.
it has different levels of thickness or whatever, like he's a table expert. And then
Yeah.
it cuts to his boss and he's just like, yeah, he has nothing to do with the furniture. The only time he would ever have anything to do with it is when it's moving it into a house or like out of the store and into a truck. Like
He's
I like
very,
that
very
guy
funny.
too. I like
He's
that guy
just
too because
lying.
he's a non-actor. He's like really an owner of a furniture store, I think. Like,
Oh
the guy who
no!
says
Just-
that.
I assume
Oh,
they
gotta
had
get
as many non-actors as they could. If they just like, can you say a couple lines or whatever, sign this release, but gives
we
it
gotta
authenticity.
we gotta get rid of these guys moving furniture just lying to our faces all the time. We gotta drain the swamper.
what do you what do you think Fubar says about like these kind of working class, I guess working class kind of lumpen, kind of, well, they're like kind of like a white trash type, right? I mean, uh why how does Fubar bring this type of person to the screen, and what do you think it's saying about class, if anything?
Well, it definitely speaks to like this. What I saw in friends of mine, there was like this real divide between people who were, and it was mostly class based, but there was exceptions, and there was this divide between real go-getters, people who bought into the program. They were world beaters. If they were into politics, they believed it could be changed. If they were into making something of themselves, they were wanting to go to Ivies and stuff like that. But the people that I mostly hung out with, my friends that would watch these movies and stuff like that, they were determined to interact with the world as little as possible, and to kind of opt out of whatever was expected of them. And the FUBAR was a real guiding document for them, in that became anything that was geared towards bettering themselves, including school, like including high school at the time, was seen as just not oriented towards the party, that's not not interesting to
It
them.
was anti-Givener, if you.
Yeah,
If you
it
like,
was
yeah.
anti-Givener, and
Yeah.
they did not see any, like these two. They didn't see any reason to uh, uh, do anything that didn't involve like having as much fun as possible in their mind, even if it meant curtailing their opportunities for fun and everything in the future. Which so watching this is now, as I am now, it's just like it's very intense to see the people that I know who lived this way and went through these exact same steps, despite having this guiding document to what would happen if they did that. If they tried to find kind of this like beer soaked Calgarian Neverland.
I'm thinking more about the political context, and I know I said earlier that there's like no politics in the movie, but there is a kind of like, if you think about them as like working class and not particularly interested in uh, climbing the ladder or like social status, all that kind of stuff. If they're, because they're so about Givener, um, like these are the early years of like what would become the boom times in Alberta. Like into like a handful of years later, in 2006, Ralph Klein, the premier, wrote like, what was it, like $400 checks to every Albertan in the province because the province made so much money from oil and gas. Roth bucks or whatever, right? So this is like beginning that upward trend to like the province having too much money and not knowing what to do with it, and associated with that is like this pressure to start to condition yourself to get in early, basically, like get in get into the oil and gas jobs, get into the like the professional business jobs that are associated with oil and gas exploration. um, all the sort of like client services around the oil and gas industry are also kind of like pathways to the corporate world. And there's all these incentives and pressures to save up, buy a little house, it'll increase in value, get a wife, all that. Like all that is kind of like the package of like the normative what you should do as a good Calgarian.
Yeah.
And so there's like a total rejection of that, right? It's like they have a kind of like high school hedonism or immaturity, and they just like keep running with it. And that's perhaps like the most like shocking or refreshing part of the film, is that the I guess like maybe you only see it in the character of Tron, but there is a kind of like straight edge normative pressure like throughout the whole city, and they completely like disregard it, which is perhaps why the movie's so funny.
Yeah, I found it much more particularly relatable to the people I know who stayed in the Maritimes. So anybody who was like a go-getter or wanted to establish some sort of like life with a forward momentum would move. Like, so everyone who was sticking around, or just like, I think pretty much all of my friends at the time had serious drinking problems, and this was getting into your like mid to late 20s, not just like you're in college and so you're going to drink a lot. So it didn't have that sort of like push pull of like what society's expectations of you are versus like what you're choosing to do in rebellion, because it's basically like, okay, these are the options. But it was refreshing to know that there's like just losers everywhere, basically, because I'm just feeling like, again, kind of just I'd like to think I had was aiming for some forward momentum in life, but like by like, when you're retraining in community college when you're 25, you're like, no, I'm just stuck, I'm spinning wheels here. So yeah, that was my kind of political read on it, and it didn't seem to match what I was expecting about Calgary or Alberta growing up, where it's like literally like, gold paved streets or everybody has money or whatever. And I'm obviously, as an adult, I'm like, well, it was never like that. That was the political decisions they made. But when grow up in a poor post-industrial community, and everyone's getting checks in other provinces, you're like, okay, well, that's different, but maybe not so different after all.
I think Alberta is probably, because of the oil and gas industry, a bit of an outlier, maybe in Canada overall, and even maybe North America overall. When we're talking about what's happening in terms of class, I mean, at this time, like the '90s, I mean, the FUBAR boys, they're kind of performing. They're performing a kind of, like a kind of working class, or like kind of poor character type. And like it does go back, it must have its roots partly in that alternative culture of the 1990s in a lot of ways, right? So grunge was very much interested in like the aesthetics of poverty, like ripped jeans and old clothes. And it's kind of that time, it's kind of an inheritance from punk, I think. And like that alternative aesthetic was making, I think, political claims sometimes. It was an alternative to mainstream, right? That's why it was called alternative. It was kind of anti-consumerist. That's why you have old clothes. That's why you have used clothes. And it didn't turn out to be terribly effective, as a kind of political resistance. Of course, it's simply aesthetic, right? But I think that alternative rock type, by the time the 2000s rolls around, is becoming a hipster instead. And so the hipster is a slightly different type. I mean, I see a lot of hipster in Terry and Dean, because the hipster is defined by their brands. And it may be like a brand, like it may be a style that is that is like out of date, that's nostalgic, that's in poor taste. And it may signal certain class affiliations, like it signals that you're white trash, or it signals that you're poor, or it signals that you're whatever. But it's very like deliberately chosen. So, Terry like are very much, defined by the Pilsner brand beer. Like the prototypical hipster at the time was drinking what Pabst Blue Ribbon. Instead of trucker hats, they have long hair. Like instead of like plaid shirts, they have like maybe or like the metal tee or whatever. So I kind of see like Terry and Dean as kind of half hipster, half hoser, right? They have that kind of Canadian hoser take on what is a hipster type.
There's a weird kind of like amalgamation of a few different influences, right? There's
Yeah,
like there's the Bob and Doug McKenzie hoser thing going on.
yeah,
There's a bit of like the Wayne's World thing going on.
yeah.
And there's a bit of like, because of the mockumentary style, there's a bit of like Spinal Tap going on. So it's kind of like all three influences are kind of jumbled up in this film, which just adds to the fun, I guess.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of the bunch here, so I have like memory of being a young man when hipsterism was at its height, and there's like something about you know these guys that is very like hipster identity was very much chosen, and it was very much purchased, and it was very much performed, and people were choosing to like dress like they were working class or whatever, and they were and and I just think like these were very much the hipster type was very much a middle class person who really had the time and ability to do that. And so to me, there's something maybe psychological happening like on a mass kind of on a mass scale where a lot of middle class people are kind of this is I guess goes back to the 90s too, are deciding to dress like they're poor or to dress like they're working class, to adopt that kind of a style. And yeah, go ahead, Joel.
Because you have the whole like the critique of the inauthenticity of the office and the cubicle and the middle class lifestyle, and so you have this embrace of the of working class aesthetics or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And but this is happening, at the same time that the 90s like um kind of like symbolically and materially like really ravaged the working class, like especially the 90s. Of course, this has been going on through the whole neoliberal period, but especially the 90s with like NAFTA, right? And manufacturing jobs were going to leave, and there was really this whole discourse about the future is it's the internet, it's information age, it's the future is
globalization, white collar jobs. Yeah,
absolutely. You need an education to do that. Education being one of the primary things that defines who a middle class person is. And so the 90s is really terrible. Also, like just in terms of discourse, in terms of how the news talks about what is happening to the working class and who they are. And so it's kind of interesting that at the same time there are these it's part of youth culture to appropriate working class style and sort of perform that identity. And I think you see that a little bit in Terry and Dean. And
and sorry, I keep interrupting you. Is that okay?
No, it's
okay.
It's great. It's perfect.
So part of I agree that that's part of what's going on, but I think part of what is also going on is that like the neighborhoods that are at least represented as like where Terry and Dean are from, as well as like the neighborhoods kind of associated with the Loose Moose and it's kind of like where it was located and the people associated with it come from like the northeast and the southeast sides of the city, which are traditionally the working class neighborhoods of the city, and a fair amount of what is going on in these like depictions of working class life, I think, is a kind of the hidden story of a side of Calgary that never gets featured or that's never spoken about or whatever. So there is while there is like a kind of performativity or maybe an appropriation going on, there's also like a kind of attempt to represent a side of the city that gets ignored a lot. So I think you have a bit of both things going on.
It did ring very authentic to me. I mean, I know it's a movie and it's got several layers of kind of performativity just by the nature of what it is, but it did seem like a glimpse into like a different strain of like Canadian working class culture that isn't just like a put on or like layers of influences from other things. Like Joel mentioned all the movies that I thought of while I was watching it, but I think they merged them into something that isn't just like an ironic amalgamation of entertainment that you recognize. Like it seems like it's a place and these are people, even if they're pretty ridiculous or whatever. So I think that comes through pretty much through all of the installments of FUBAR.
That's a good thing that Joel said a little bit ago, where there is a kind of a straight edge pressure to Calgary, but it all has this like simmering substance abuse issue, like just under the surface, where the oil future trading floors are going to be just as filled with cocaine as it's all gone Pete Tong, as he like dives into like swimming pools filled with that pure China white. And it's I think it's interesting that this this kind of rejection of middle class Canadian life is as soaked in beer as completely possible, and cheap beer and stuff like that. But it never really, like, I don't think in the entire movie you ever see them consume spirits. It's only they talk about getting a handle of 2.6 at one or a handle a 2.6 of liquor at one point, but I don't think they actually like do it. I think there's more rum consumed in like a single minute of Trailer Park Boys than there is in this one, and it's very much like these cans of beer, these cans of cheap beer are highly represented in this entire thing, and it's I think that's, I know Ireland has this like conversation all the time about like our main cultural export being drunkenness, or our main cultural characteristic being drunkenness and stuff like that. But I feel like that was kind of exported here, and in all levels of our of like Western Canadian culture, there is like some sort of substance abuse. Like, and it's that to me has always like been one of the interesting parts of FUBAR, and one of the interesting things in Michael Dowse's like future work is that pretty much he will always explore whatever the particular addiction is in an area. Yeah.
So a question about the plot, because I can't remember it clearly, even though I watched it not too long ago. When they go camping, is that like a celebration of him being clear of the cancer, or is it's just a go-giver, perhaps as a last hurrah, is kind of the sense, right?
More of it.
It's last hurrah.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that before or after the party? They all kind of I watched it literally hours ago again.
Well, there's a party near the end of the movie before Dean is going to get his final test results that will like that end up clearing him, saying that he's now cured of cancer, he's in remission now. So that's a party at the end, but what Joel's referring to is like kind of more midway. They go on this like a really FUBAR style camping trip where they bring literally nothing with them except
they bring a tent, some old lawn chairs, which they end up burning,
and the director's like begging him to go to a hotel because he can't like camp with them anymore. It's amazing.
So I love that particular episode of the movie because at least at my high school, like there was grad camping. Like if you're part of the graduating year, you went camping, and something very similar to that camping trip in FUBAR happened, but with like the graduating class or whatever, right? And it was like everybody goes to the woods completely unprepared, gets too drunk, and passes out in various places. It was kind of like the culture, I guess. It's
seeing it represented in the film. It's different, regional variations.
So it's very funny to see it in the film, and even though like you see the director kind of like wake up and like just peel himself off the ground and like not be able to look at light, and they immediately put a beer in his hand and say like drink this, it'll make you feel better, kind of thing. All of that was relatable to a certain extent.
Yeah, then after that they go, is that when they go to High River, or do they go to High River after that?
I think they go to High River to find some ladies.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
and that's actually, that has my favorite scene, which is the talking to the meat plant worker with the UFCW hat. So that's some real working class solidarity there. So.
Yeah, so in High River, I think that's maybe my favorite scene too.
Yeah.
I mean, they do real world spoofs and goofs, kind of like, I guess Borat style, or maybe more important of an influence would be like even Tom Green, right, doing stunts
Yeah.
in public in character, but they're in character.
Or like
So-
Just for Laughs. That's
Right,
stunts in
Just for-
public, isn't it?
That is Just for Laughs. That's right.
Yeah,
the
but
JFL
gags, not
classics.
the just taped stand up, the gags, which is again real Quebec culture.
Oh man, you're mentioning Tom Green made me think of high school again, because Tom Green was very popular at this time in the early 2000s. Anyways.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's very much one of the influences on this too. At least like the mockumentary part where they're, like in High River, exactly. It's an amazing moment because they meet a guy who works at the meat processing plant, and he just looks like an older Dean. He looks exactly like Dean, but he's like 20 to 30 years older, and he's riding a bike.
like,
He's riding a bike
There's
around.
thousands of people like him in the plant. He says that. So
That's right. And so, there's a sort of transgressive thrill when that happens, because you're like, oh, that's like is that kind of, they're lying to this guy, and are they kind of making fun of him? Like, I don't really know, but there's a kind of transgressiveness to the whole thing, like that you get, maybe makes you feel maybe a little bit tawdry at times, but there, it's kind of, its power is that it shows you, I guess the film itself is really giving her, it's like kind of being excessive, and it's like willing to transgress and go talk to real people in that way. So I think that's kind of happening, and it's also like it shows the that moment really reaffirms the characters themselves, right? It shows how good of a portrayal that they're doing when you see that confrontation with the real world, and you see, oh, here's a real world type, and here's their portrayal of it, and it's actually very accurate. So it's like a very, like, to me, it's a very bracing moment in this movie, because the rest of it's not like that. I think that's really only that scene, or that set of scenes where they are in the real world talking to people.
yeah, I'm glad they don't
Right?
go too far with that. You
Yeah.
can see how it could get tiresome even after 20 minutes or half an hour. But a little touch is just like perfect, because you're like, okay, they're all going along with it. So
It is a phenomenal scene though, and you're right in that it's like it feels transgressive or exploitative perhaps, but
Yeah.
part of it is also like their characters are celebrating this person and people like this person, right, and representing this person in film or whatever. So it's, yeah, I think because it does both, it's in part perhaps exploitative, but it's also definitely like a kind of celebration of this kind of character, and it's doing both at the same time, which is why it's such an amazing scene.
Yeah, that's why they can get away with it, right?
Yeah.
They really pull it off. And it is really important, I think you're right, Karen, that it's only a little bit, right? Because you have to, that moment of entering the real world just kind of reaffirms the fictional world that we're otherwise in, and it would get kind of boring if we were just kind of, I think if they were just doing that the whole time. Do you have a favorite scene, Clinton?
Yeah, my favorite scene is definitely what's his face's funeral. 'Cause
Farrell.
I love a good funeral.
yeah,
And easily the best is just like when he's trying to tell the grieving mother a joke, just because that actress, whoever she was, or if she was not a non-actress, her receiving the joke is one of the most insanely perfect deliveries I've ever seen, where she's just like, oh.
He's calmly explaining this kind of like racist,
Well, thank you
been
for
there,
that,
done that
Bob.
thing. Like,
Yeah.
like,
thank you.
Oh.
We needed a smile today.
yeah.
It's just like, oh, man, it's just
It's like,
it's-
did my son take this long to get it? And they're like, no.
Yeah, did my dead son, who we are currently at a wake for, did he enjoy this little goof he did here? It's just like the Coen brothers, if they saw this, they would just be like, "Oh my god, that's perfect!" Like it just had that vibe. Just perfect scene.
The death of Farrell though is like such an unexpected turn.
Yeah, that was like definitely
like
when I first watched it that I just like literally almost fell off the sofa. I thought it was so
absolutely
funny.
shocked me. Absolutely shocked me.
Oh, he's a fucking idiot too, though. You don't just jump into strange bodies of water head first.
because they've been
But
giving
they
her
did
for
thousands
days.
of times, and
He doesn't know how to do it. He does not know how to give her.
Explain it. He did it wrong because he wasn't giving her enough.
And they're just trying to
I can't
explain
even-
themselves the whole time. It's just like, we swim there all the time and never die. It's like, it's so strange that he died, like, because we don't die.
And just the way the scene is set up, like they've been giving her for days. They go camping, go to High River, like they've had all these adventures, and now they're just like jumping in, like basically in a pond by a waterfall. And like Dean goes, Terry goes, and then Farrell goes, but importantly Farrell goes head first, and then there's just this like pause and he doesn't surface, and you're just kind of waiting like, oh, did something go wrong here? And then he floats up, just like head still in the water. All you see is his back, and he just starts like floating downstream. And the camera gets dropped and everybody rushes after him.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, to me, the moment I laughed is when the Chiron comes up and it says Farrell like 1970 like or 1965 to 2000, like, oh, he's just dead.
There it goes.
and then the movie continues. It's like, oh, it's like, their film now.
Yeah.
Oh, very
Excellent.
good.
See, yeah, Farrell, I really love that. It is a funny character, you know. I really like he's like, yeah, they're spoofing this like middle class artsy type who doesn't know how to give her, is fascinated with this kind of underclass, and it ultimately is his death. But I also like the first scene of the movie too, where they're watching Farrell's student movie. It's like, I guess you're assuming that this is when Farrell meets them and he's just trying to show them what he does as a filmmaker. And it's just like them watching this movie and they're just like, this is total shit. They're just like making fun of this like artsy like set of artistic jump cuts and stuff, and they're like, this is like the stupidest, boringest thing. I think he says something like, what are the lines he says? Darn, I'm forgetting them now. Oh yeah, turn down the suck.
Yeah.
So
Classic
it's
line.
it's like a comment, definitely a comment on this middle class like artistic type who is kind of voyeuristic or maybe just a little naive or whatever. So
Yeah, student films are just the pits.
But in a sense, it's like this working class revenge on like the attempt to exploit them, right? Which is very funny.
Yeah, I very much like that. I think that scene of the funeral takes place in Paul Spence's parents' house. So I do believe there's some the Spence family house was listed as a shooting location, so it may have been that scene. So that may have been actually Dean's like real life family that he's talking to.
Oh my god!
So if that's the case, that's even funnier, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's talking to his own mom and who's supposedly grieving the death of her fictional son. So very funny. So, any other thoughts about FUBAR 1? Because otherwise we're going to jump to FUBAR 2.
Jump into the other FUBARs. Probably the best one. It's just so pure. Every scene is perfect. I don't know what else.
Yeah, because of the mockumentary style of the first film, it just has a more relatable feel, I think. The second one's good too, but that first one is a classic for those reasons.
Thanks for watching our episode about FUBAR, and don't forget to check out our next episode about FUBAR 2 and FUBAR Age of Computer. Okay, see you then.